Do you want to take a trip but can't find the vacation time for that week-long adventure? Or maybe you're just starting your travel journey and want something more manageable. New York City could be a great option. Welcome back to our Weekend Warrior series. Today we're going to focus on New York City and why it can be the perfect weekend destination. But be careful, dropping into this massive metropolis without any landmark or event in mind may leave you feeling lost and over budget.
Welcome to the Travel More podcast.
Each episode, we share custom itineraries, travel hacks, expert advice, and even stories of our past travel failures to help you level up your travel game.
I'm Shelly, a lover of plans, itineraries, and cheap flights. I'm an expert deal finder with one eye always on the budget.
And I'm Bruce, the improviser, ready to pick up where plans fail to turn letdowns into unexpected trip favorites. We're here to bust through barriers that stop you from making your travel dreams a reality.
So book that flight, buy the tickets, and say hello to your next adventure.
This is the Travel More Podcast. Welcome back to the Travel More Podcast.
Welcome.
So we're in week 2 or 3.
It depends on if we're going to count our little hype podcast.
That's
thing.
week 0.5.
Okay, then we're at 2.5.
And it's still season 2, but we did go away for a bit, so we're back and we're excited to kind of keep the ball rolling with recording, which, we're actually moving too. There's so many things happening.
Yeah, I do feel like we mentioned that.
Yes.
But yeah, we're moving, and Bruce did this very cool thing, I guess, and then it ended up being not that cool because we're moving, which is that if you didn't know, I guess you can get audits sometimes from local, I think ours is for the water company, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we had this audit.
Yeah.
Right? I
guess an audit is
audit.
I guess an audit is the right word. Essentially, it's like a free check.
Yeah, I feel like that's right. Anyways, they came and checked, and then they found you could have a new sump pump, just random stuff.
Well, they also found the sewer line needed to be replaced, which you always want to find before you have to.
Yeah, it's very true. But this was literally we just did it because his dad did it, and we're yeah, sure, why not? And then we signed off on everything to be done, and they're paying for all of it. The water company's paying for all of it, which is awesome. And then 3 days later, decided to sell the house. And so, of course, now that we know that exists, we had to disclose it, and now it has to all be done.
So, yeah, there's been some loud noises and a lot of movement. And we've been slowly packing up the house, but I feel like the one thing that's going to remain standing is our little studio and microphones, couch, and computer. It's going to be the last thing I put.
I was going to say it's the last thing we've left in the basement.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking about. It's everything around us is in boxes except the podcast setup. So we're here for you still, even though our life's in boxes as we go.
Yeah.
So no, it's been fun, and we still have been managing to do some traveling.
Yeah.
So what's fun about today's episode where we're kind of getting back into fun, what's a good weekend destination?
Yeah, which is our bread and butter.
Something Shelly and I always talked about was how if you're not someone who's getting out and doing big trips, or but you want to travel more, as the name of the show goes, I like to think about doing local things, regional stuff, and short weekend trips.
Yeah.
Because it kind of forces you to say, hey, do I have that time? I'm going to make that time, and I'm going to kind of commit to going out and doing something. And when you start there, it builds momentum. So
absolutely.
We actually, even though all this is going on, we got to go to New York City last weekend. Literally on Sunday, we drove in the morning to get brunch with a great friend of ours that we haven't seen in a while. Because New York's a place, if anybody goes to New York City, because it's very popular and very easy to get to from pretty much anywhere in the country, we have to go meet them. Because we can drive, so it took us a couple hours. We parked, we had brunch, and then we came home. So
it was a wild
fun
brunch.
Very fun. And for the friend that was there, he flew for the weekend for a wedding. So it's totally a doable place, whether you're driving regionally, taking a train, or even looking for a flight.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great destination to talk about as one of those jumping off points as a weekend trip.
Yeah, and we've talked about weekend trips before, and we had some criteria about what makes a good weekend trip. And for me, some of that criteria is one, that it's going to have cheap flights. And because New York is a hub for almost anywhere, especially anywhere going international, there's so many flights in New York from pretty much any airport ever. And so because of that, you can often find cheap flights just because there's a lot of seats available.
Cheap and often direct.
I was going to say, the more seats available, the cheaper the flight typically is how that goes. So there's usually some cheap flights. Maybe not every flight's cheap, but you can usually find a cheap flight. And then there's a lot to do. So you can, it's pretty accessible to everybody. Like everyone can find something to do in New York City, which we'll talk about a little later. And then you can pretty much go any season and find like there's a good reason to be there.
Right. It's not super seasonal.
Right.
It's not like some places where you only want to go. Now, I mean, you may not want to be someone who goes to New York in the dead of winter, but even if you do, there's still a lot happening.
And there's still things to find, which again, we'll like touch on each season and tell you, what the good parts of each of those are. But it's a little different than say like when we live in Panama City, Florida. Like you really wouldn't want to go there in like February because like there's not much of a beach going on. That's not the time to go. Right.
It actually gets kind of cold too.
Yeah, and like things are closed for the season.
So that's a very seasonal destination.
Yeah, even Cape Cod.
Yep.
Like there's just not a lot to do in Cape Cod in that season. So like, with the weekend trip, especially if you're just going because you found a cheap flight and you're not going for something specific originally, having a kind of a year-round destination is key.
Yeah, it's nice. And it also makes me think, we haven't talked about going in a while, which is Scott's Cheap Flights, now Going.
Yeah.
They've only kind of enhanced their offerings. You can still sign up for like a free account. But it's a good destination if you wanted to put New York as like the itinerary you're looking for.
Yeah.
And you'll get emails to see when there's a cheap flight that pops up. So if it's one of those things you're not like, I have to take a week in June to go somewhere, but you've got maybe once a month you can take a weekend. Wait until you see a flight that pops up from your area to New York.
Yeah. I mean, that's always my go-to is to use Going.
Yeah, but this is like even more so, I feel like.
Yeah.
Because it's...
Well, you're very likely to get a flight to New York.
That's what I mean.
They come up all the time.
So it's a great like use of that. So. And
also really quick, this is like kind of a different thing, but you could combine these two ideas. There's also like an idea about kind of positioning flights, and I think we've talked about this before, but New York is one of the best positioning flight destinations to Europe in the United States. So what we mean by that is like my dad, for example, living in Memphis to Europe is like obscenely expensive.
Yeah,
like,
you're probably gonna have a layover somewhere anyway.
Yeah, you're absolutely gonna have a layover. There's like 0 direct flights international, at least to Europe. So you're gonna fly to New York or Washington or somewhere anyways. But if you choose the flight and you go Memphis to New York, not on the same itinerary, like you just book a flight to New York and then you book a flight from New York to Europe, honestly, most of the time, it's probably going to be a good amount cheaper. And what you can do there is you could combine a trip. Like you could make a weekend out of being in New York and then from there fly to Europe.
Yeah, I think that's such a overlooked like planning strategy for trips is thinking about travel hubs and the importance of them and like where are the big airports, where do they what airlines service direct or cheaper flights because they have higher volume.
Yep.
New York's just one of those examples. It's a place you can go all year round, and from JFK you're going to get to a lot of different places much cheaper. But don't think of it as I'm going to go from like Memphis to Italy, let's say Rome, Barcelona, or whatever. Because you're gonna get what it comes up with as like you're gonna have to take a layover flight and then connect, and it's almost always. I could probably say always, I think, going to be more expensive.
There's probably very few instances when it would be less, and it would probably be some sort of, like, special happening. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like some sort of deal that they're putting out. Otherwise, yeah, it's probably going to be more expensive than just doing a positioning flight.
So anyway, about New York,
yeah,
which we love because we live so close and we love theater.
To be fair, though, like we literally chose to live in Connecticut because it's so close to New York.
Yeah, well, it's more affordable.
Right. I said that during brunch. I was like, my favorite part of living in Connecticut is going to brunch in New York, but being able to buy a house.
Yeah, it's affording a house
right.
and buying brunch in New York. Yes.
Yeah.
So definitely, it's awesome for us. We love it. So I think we have a little bit of knowledge about it. When I think about New York City, there's probably 1,000 different people who have blogged, written books, done documentaries. Least. New York's huge. So this is definitely just an opening into our perspective.
Yeah.
Of some things we want you to think about.
Yeah. And we talked about this even on the way to New York recently is New York is one of the few destinations that we've been to. And we literally could think of two. And it's New York and London that are so big and have so much happening that they're actually not great places to just kind of get dropped into and like wander.
Yes, well, and this actually makes me think of a thing I heard on NPR about a week ago. I forget, it was a travel writer, and essentially they were talking about the opposite of the current, like, maybe not bucket list. In a way, bucket list is kind of like making a to-do list of, I want to go to this place that I saw probably on Instagram or
TikTok,
wherever, TikTok. Yeah. And it's like, I want to go to this place, get this picture, eat these 5 things, and kind of repeat the experience that everyone else is doing. Mm-hmm. Right. So there are some people, this person's perspective was like, you don't want to do any of that. Like, you don't want to just repeat someone else's journey. Instead, show up and do something completely spontaneous. And also the point that we've made before, that a lot of times you hear in maybe podcasts or books or journal or blogging, you never hear anything about like the mediocre experience or the travel fail, right? Yeah. You only ever hear about the best, like the gem, you have to see this, and then there's all filters and pictures. So I really like the takeaway of that, which was, some of the best memories I know we've had and we've shared are the things that don't happen as planned, are some of the spontaneous things. But I think after listening to this, I definitely find myself, and I think Shelley would agree, somewhere in like the middle of these camps.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like we want to have those authentic experiences, but I've always kind of criticized the idea of, people saying like, don't be like a tourist. I'm like, you're always going to be a tourist.
Right. Or like live like a local, and it's like, so take my laundry to the laundromat. You know what I mean? Like, right. If you live like a local, like you're probably just hanging out. Like,
at some point I'm like, is this travel anymore if you're just going to live somewhere? I think there's definitely a difference, but there's like a vein of thought right now that if you're really traveling, you're actually living like a local. And I'm like, wait, that's no longer,
Yeah, I think there's a nice balance to be had between the two, where, and we've talked about this too, where obviously we're going to go see the Eiffel Tower.
Sure.
But it was like probably our least favorite thing about Paris. But like, we're going to go see it.
Yeah, why not?
And we're going to go to all the bakeries, and we're going to get the baguettes, and we're going to do those things that I guess are like the typical tourism things, because we are tourists.
Right.
Like, we're there, and they're honestly, they're tourism things for a reason. They're not the only thing we're going to do.
No.
Like, we are also going to get kind of like lost milling about the streets and like stopping somewhere that wasn't on our list, and find these little restaurants or cafes, or, stop and get a drink somewhere. Like, we're going to do those things too, which are very cool sometimes and really terrible other times. Like,
right.
That's just it's the roll the dice.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that we definitely, probably have heard, if you've been listening from our stories, I think we definitely have a balanced approach. And Shelley and I have not really done really slow travel or like living, I think that's a different thing, right? We often talk about a week or two at a time. The longest trips we've taken have been about a month.
Yep.
And we often are moving,
right.
I'm not trying. And I do think that's a whole other thing. And I think it's awesome if you have the opportunity to be somewhere.
Yeah.
But New York is a good example of why I think a balance is important.
Yeah, I actually okay, I will just say people romanticize, and we do too. So we're not guilty of this. Romanticize the idea of, like I just said, like wandering down a street in Paris and finding this cafe and it being like this cool mom and pop thing.
Yeah, pretending like you live there.
Yeah, and sometimes those experiences are very cool. And then sometimes, like specifically in New York, I have a great example. You get really hungry and are trying to find somewhere to eat and are literally scrambling to find anywhere to eat and end up in a super like mediocre, overpriced, super loud, like blah type restaurant. Yeah. It was when we did that, I literally have an example. It was an Italian restaurant in Hell's Kitchen, and it was like not good. I mean, it was very expensive. It was very expensive, and it was very okay. It wasn't terrible, but like definitely could have found 800 million things that were
well, I think that's
priced.
The thing that kicks me about New York is like, knowing that the hole in the wall next to the place you chose would have been the best thing ever, and then you end up in this like whatever.
But if you don't have any plan,
right.
You don't actually know like what's the hole in the wall versus what's this really cool thing I just stumbled upon. And that's kind of my point.
Yeah.
Is people romanticize the idea of like, I'll just wander around and find cool stuff. And sometimes you do find really cool stuff. And other times you find very mediocre or even bad things. And that's kind of, I guess, the like trade-off, and some people are okay with doing that, and usually I am too, but New York and London, so those are the two that like really stand out to me. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth the
time it would take to maybe
time,
like
not time, more like it's just so expensive, and both these places are like so wildly, or they can be so wildly expensive that like I don't like wasting money on mediocre stuff.
Sure.
And so like if I wander into a Portuguese, like we're in Portugal and I wander into a bakery and I eat something and it was like €1.50 or something, and it was like, this wasn't the best, whatever. But then you do that in New York and it's like an $8 pastry and you're like, well, that was terrible. And like, I spent $8 on this. You know, it's the same idea in my head. That's why New York in particular, I wanted to talk about, just because that is a place that I really do think it's worth planning extra.
Yeah, and I think you bring up, there's a bit of relativity there, right? Where it's like, if you go to a place that is not as expensive, then it's not as big of a deal. So, but anyway, to move on to New York more specifically, it's a great example of why Shelly and I really recommend having a couple anchor things that you want to find or go into, especially if you're only there for a weekend. And and that's kind of the first thing I would recommend is think of the event or the activity that you're looking to go to. And New York has so much to offer. It's almost another reason why if you just show up, you might be overwhelmed. So you want to think about, like, are you into museums? What kind of museum? You know, there's some of the world-class museums, and it's interesting to think about a city like London as a similar way, right? So if you want to spend your time at art museums, you know, go to the Met, go to the Guggenheim, whatever, MoMA, check out when they're open and plan your day around that. Then maybe look around and say, when do I want to get food? Where am I going to stay? And that'll help you get an idea of like where you want to center yourself in New York.
Right.
So yeah, that's one example, but there's so many other things. Sporting events, you can come in for
many
oh my god, concerts, literally everything in the world.
Comedy club. I mean, you could go see. Obviously, Bruce and I would almost always put it around theater, like Broadway.
Yeah, for Shelly and I, it almost 100% of the time is like going to see a play or a musical or some show. You know, which often obviously puts us in the theater district, but we like to branch out and do something else too.
Oh yeah, no, this isn't to say it's the only thing you're doing. It's just so much easier to start there. So you don't have to have this in mind when you book the tickets, but like let's just give a timeline here. So you find this really great deal to New York for a weekend. Great, you buy it, done. Now you have your airline tickets. Then you go in and you say like, what's
happening this time?
What it's happening. You can look up festivals that are going on or fairs or events. You can't, like Bruce said, if you're a sporting person, you can kind of see like what sports events are happening, or theater, like what shows are happening. Museums are always available. Like just see like what are some things I would want to do, and I'd plan 1 or 2 a day. So then you have that done. Then figure out where you want to stay. Probably the number one thing I see that like just makes me so nervous for people is when I'm on some like different Facebook groups and stuff about like traveling and advice and stuff like that, including our own. And so people will say like, you know, I booked this hotel in Long Island or in Queens or something for my trip to New York because it was the cheapest I found.
Oh, jeez.
And like, right. Can you get to Manhattan from Long Island and Queens? Like, yes. But like...
But do you realize how long that will take you?
And that's like a serious commute in. And not every area is even the nicest. Like, that's true in New York City too, but like, it's just like, you probably won't... If it was super cheap, first of all, in New York, I would be wary. Because super cheap...
especially in Manhattan.
There's not a lot.
Actually, probably all of New York.
That's
like
what I mean.
Really, really cheap.
Like you're going to spend a little bit of money. Depending on the season, obviously that will change. We can talk about that in a second. But like you really want to be in Manhattan. Like, because especially for a weekend.
I think also because the subway system is so like all roads kind of lead to Manhattan.
Right. But they also, it's easy and it's not easy to navigate the subway because things change and lines shut down and lines only run certain times and there's express lanes. And so that's fine if you're in Manhattan. It's not that hard to figure out. But if you're out somewhere, like out Queens, even Brooklyn, unless Brooklyn's where you're going to base yourself, Long Island, if you're like further out, those like express lines and things, like they're talking to you. Like they're not going to stop because they're going to try to go all the way through from point A to point B. And you might be like, no, but I needed to get it halfway off.
Right. So you got to, so even, I mean, I think it's great now that you can use Apple or Google Maps and there's a lot of information on transit. but I still think it can overwhelm somebody who's not used to it very easily. And there can be changes, like Shelley's saying, depending on the time of year, the day, maintenance, whatever's happening, shutdowns. But yeah, knowing that's a good thing about New York City, is just knowing just how massive the different boroughs are and how long like a New York mile is compared to like anywhere else in the country.
Right.
Just like a half hour just to get out of Manhattan to get to the very beginning of Queens, Astoria, things like that. Right. And knowing that like, yeah, there's Ubers. I don't recommend driving in the city if you don't typically drive in the city, and it's just parking is terrible, right?
I would never. Yeah. Bruce is a master at it. It's literally going to be his retirement job one day, like being a taxi driver. But I would never.
Well, the problem really is parking, because you can't really bounce around easily. You're always, paying. Yeah, it's just, I don't recommend it. It's just too many other options. But just things like knowing that getting from Queens to Brooklyn is not straight up and down, like, going through Manhattan on the subway. You'd think they're next to each other, but actually they're very far from each other.
Very far.
So if you're going to do things in Brooklyn, or you want to go to like Red Hook, which is, a place Shelley and I have wanted to go. I hear it's kind of cool, whatever.
Yeah.
I haven't actually spent a lot of time in Brooklyn. Yeah, I'd love to see it, but
it's because we're usually in Queens and it's not close.
Right. Well, we have friends like Astoria, Queens area, which there's a lot to do over there. It feels more like maybe a neighborhood, whereas Manhattan definitely is like the New York that everyone knows. But even like if you go to a Yankees game and you're in the Bronx or you're in Harlem, just knowing how long it takes to get from that top of like Manhattan and north of it all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah.
Little things like that. It takes way more time than you think.
Yeah. I would just say, like, I would really take this order of like planning your trip into consideration, where it's like the first thing you obviously have is your tickets, and then you have your event or whatever you're focusing around, and then you find your like hotel around that area. It doesn't have to be right next to it, but like around, like, so for Bruce and I, theater is absolutely where we center our stuff, but we do not stay in
Times Square. God, no. Nope.
Right, but that's where all the theaters are. So you'd be like, well, you just said. So we don't stay there because it's crazy.
Yeah.
So we stay in Chelsea, which is close enough. It's like a 25-minute walk or something. And we can take the subway. So it's like close enough to be very accessible to what we're trying to get to. But then like we looked before, now we love Chelsea, so we go all the time, but before we were looking at where to stay, it was like, this has a good combination of like, there's a lot of restaurants, there's a lot of art galleries in Chelsea, a lot of other things to do here that are also very cool. And
on foot, like really easily on foot.
Right. And we can on foot to the theater.
Yes.
Right. Which is a big deal because, again, you don't want to get like lost in something and then be like, oh, I have to make it to a show.
Right.
And then be like, it's a 30-minute subway ride. And then you find out the subway line's down. You have to go over here. It's like you do want to make sure that you're planning your like commute out. And that's why we like the fact that we can walk. Because it's like, well, it's 25 minutes. Like, we're not even going to take the subway.
Yeah, and I think give yourself time. Actually, it was funny. We were driving back, and I was telling Shelley, like, I don't know. This would be people who live here. I've never lived in New York City, but I was like, I don't know if I'd ever get that sense of like, oh, I'm in this area, like the East Village, and I'm just going to hang out, but I have to be somewhere at 8 in another area. Like, how do you get that sense of when do you leave? Because, everywhere else, most other places in the country, at least the United States, you hop in your car and you're like, okay, it always takes 20 minutes unless there's an accident.
I was going to say, I think it's kind of the same thing though. It's like you could hit traffic.
But you never know. I think that's the thing in New York is like, you have to just give yourself time if you have to be somewhere.
Yeah.
Because, there's a lot of things that could, if you look at one moment and you say it's going to take 20 minutes, it's not a guarantee that it's going to be that 3 hours later. Because of traffic and things.
Well, it's funny you say that because as I was like explaining Chelsea, I was going to say like we could get dinner and then go. But actually we don't. If we're going to go see a show, we wouldn't eat dinner in Chelsea. We'd eat dinner like in the theater district because like you're saying, you don't really want to be that far away just in case.
Yeah. If you know you got to be somewhere at a certain time, I would just not cut it close if you're somewhere far away. And remember, when you're looking at a map, like if you're in like the East Village or like whatever, and you need to be closer to Central Park, don't, just...
I would just keep using Apple Maps or whatever.
Yeah,
and keep typing in like how far does it take for the subway. And try to make sure that you're changing the time. Because, you can do that in Apple Maps.
Oh, that's a good tip. Yeah.
Yeah, because like sometimes if you're looking at it at 10 p.m., it's like this train may run this much at 10 p.m., but then when you're actually going to be there at 7 a.m., it's going to run this often. You know what I mean? So like
Map out your route.
Yeah.
And put the times on your map. If you've ever done that, you can like ask in general with the data it has on Sunday at 3:00, you know.
How long does this take?
How long does it take?
Yeah, right.
So anyway, yeah, that's when you're thinking about New York. You're thinking about the three things again. You got your flight, you think about your event, puts you in a location, try to get your hotel in a reasonable area around that.
Like within like a 30-ish minute walk.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, props to Chelsea. It's probably, I mean, it is our favorite place to stay. I feel like the hotels like aren't that crazy. We stay at the Hyatts usually, and we stay in a different season. So this is a good point. Like it's a good transition into seasons really quick. We're not going to go into super depth about all the seasons in New York, but it is good to know kind of the highlights of each and what to expect. So Bruce and I, when we stay overnight, well, we've stayed overnight quite a bit, like in January, February, because everything's cheaper. So we have the, you know, I can't even think of the word. This is my pregnancy brain. The benefit.
Oh, the
that's
benefit.
The word.
There we go.
The benefit of going whenever, because we are so close. So we choose to go in January, February because it's way cheaper.
Right.
Like Broadway
in September
tickets are
too.
cheaper.
This time, the shoulder, kind of like the off-season peak travel, not holidays.
But even more so than September is January, because there ain't nothing going on in January.
No, it's cold.
So, right. And so this is kind of our point, is like to kind of bring up some of these things. So shoulder seasons in general, shoulder seasons meaning fall and spring really, are gonna be like all your medium price stuff, although you can find really great deals, especially like fall season in New York for whatever reason. Like right now in September, at least at some point, they have like buy one get one free Broadway tickets, and they have like a restaurant week where you can get like, you know, 3-course meals at these different places for these set prices, and they're way lower than they normally be. You know, they have these kind of like promotional things all around the city. So they're not just like for Broadway, like they're everywhere.
Right.
And generally speaking, fall and spring are like really nice times in New York.
Some of my favorite times.
Right.
I mean, obviously the winter, it depends. Sometimes the winter is not super cold, but it can get windy. That's, you know,
well,
even when
not
it's like
super cold for us who lived in Vermont and walked downtown when it's negative 30.
Okay, that's true.
For most people, it's going to be at least nippy. I mean,
you're right. Because once it's dark and the wind gets you, especially in Manhattan,
well, there's wind tunnels because of the tall buildings,
and
like,
you forget you're on the water. You know,
yes.
So it's like you get this like kind of humid chill sometimes in the winter. But yeah, the winter can be tough, and the summer can also be hot, humid, and it smells. That's like one thing about the trash in New York for whatever reason.
For whatever reason, it's just because there's a ton of it.
Yeah, but like, actually, I think usually trash pickup, like, it's just bags. They don't even have like cans. I think that might be changing though.
Is it?
Yeah.
That would not be the worst thing, because that is, the summer can be hard in New York just because it can be so hot. And there's just very little reprieve from it unless you are specifically going somewhere. So if you're just like walking around, it's not like another like mom and pop city where you can be like, oh, I'll just stop in here, I'll stop in there. Like,
it feels sometimes like, especially in Manhattan, that if you're gonna sit, you gotta pay.
Right, exactly.
Like,
that's the bathrooms too. Bathrooms. This is like a little hint just for you. Starbucks is the way to go in Manhattan.
For sure.
But beyond that, it's hard to find a bathroom. Thankfully, there's a Starbucks like every 15 feet.
Yeah, Starbucks has been my go-to. They generally always give you the code of the bathroom.
Yeah.
And because like most other places, I don't think generally I've found them to have like a CVS, for instance, or like no way.
No.
Like
that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So like when we went this last time, because now I'm in my 3rd trimester, I'm like very pregnant. And Bruce was like, there's a Starbucks. There's a Starbucks. There, just in case. He was like mapping our route. Like,
I'd be curious if anybody else goes to this city and they're like, oh no, there's give us bathroom tips, because that's something about New York that I've always found
difficult.
Yeah, it's like that's one thing Europe beats us on. Like, yeah, I'll pay €1 to use a nice bathroom in the city. Sure. Right. But like, why can't we do that here? I don't know.
Yeah.
Freedoms.
But anyway, so the shoulder seasons to me are the best times to go. And it's nice because they're not the most expensive and they have the best weather typically. Winter, as Bruce was starting to say, can be ultra brutal. It can be like mild, but even a mild winter in New York is going to be pretty cold for a lot of people.
Especially when the sun goes down.
Yeah, like my dad, if he heard Bruce say that New York wasn't that cold, would be arguing till the cows come in, because I don't think my dad's ever been in New York when it's not cold. And we go in November usually with him, so it's not even like the dead of winter. It's kind of just beginning. My dad is bundled up head to toe, so it definitely depends on your tolerance to cold, but it can be extremely cold. It can also be extremely snowy. It doesn't typically
I feel like it hasn't been as bad. It's been warmer these winters.
And also, in general, I feel like New York typically gets skipped with, the massive dump of snow. Like, Boston does not. Boston gets, covered. Yeah. But New York typically, they'll get rain. Snow, but it's not as much. But, yeah, if it's not snowing, it's probably gross and rainy.
Yeah,
which
like
is
a 40-degree
even worse.
rain. Yeah.
Yeah. So, winter can be a really nice time to go because it's very cheap. In comparison to other New York prices. And it's not busy. It's easy to get reservations for things, easy to get tickets for things. You're really not having to fight the masses for it, but you just be ready that the weather might not be the nicest. We've been a few times in January, and actually I'm trying to think, but I think all of our trips in January, the weather hasn't been bad at all.
No, it wasn't.
Right. It was cold. We wore jackets for sure and bundled up a little bit. We were lucky
with pretty bright skies.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It wasn't snowing, and it wasn't so cold for us. So we have lucked out, I guess. So it's not like it's always just dreary and cold and
just
whatever.
Look at the weather, especially if it's you're going towards a time where you have flexibility and maybe the tickets are still cheap and you don't, keep your eyes on it, or get a refundable trip if it's really bad storm.
Yeah, and I would just make sure that the bulk of your trip is inside, which is most of New York, honestly, unless you're specifically going to a sporting game or something.
Yeah, or the Bronx Zoo.
Yeah.
Or, sporting event, or you specifically want to go to Central Park.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And even then, Central Park, we went the last few times to Central Park in the winter, and it was beautiful.
Yep.
And not that crowded.
No.
And then summer, as Bruce was saying, is actually probably my least favorite time in the summer. I mean, in the city. One, because it can be just extraordinarily hot, and there's not a lot of shade or reprieve from it unless you're specifically somewhere. Everything is much busier because people go to New York, obviously, as tourists, and so tickets are more expensive. Bruce sang at Carnegie Hall a couple years ago, and I had the time to myself in New York, and so I just kind of wandered around the city myself. I went and saw a couple of shows, and I got to the TKTS booth, which is a discount booth for Broadway shows, for tickets that day. And I got there before they open, 15 or 20 minutes before they open, and I was still wrapped around 3 times, in this line.
Mm-hmm.
And
I know, versus whenever we saw The Color Purple, I'm trying to remember, we went to the one that's in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
Or somewhere else.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's quite in Brooklyn, but it is.
Or maybe it's south
it's south.
Southern, yeah. But it was, there was nobody there.
Nobody. We literally just walked up.
I want to say that was definitely not summer.
No. So, yeah. It was maybe in March, in a shoulder
Spring.
season.
Yep.
Yeah. But that was not even fully summer, because that was
June.
At the end of, was June?
I think it was the beginning, right?
Oh, it was. It was either last weekend of May or first weekend of June, because it was the rehearsal weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't even true full summer crowds yet. And I was like, man, this is wild. This is early to be lining up for this TKTS booth and still be pretty far back. Because I thought it was too early. I was like, I'm going to be sitting here forever. And then I was like, oh, maybe. I mean, I will still be, but I'm glad I got in this line.
Yeah, I think so seasonally, that's one thing about summer, but know that certain pockets of time in certain areas, New York will be packed. Christmas gets popular. New Year's, I would never go to New Times Square for New Year's. Oh my God.
I don't know if I'd say never. I mean, would I go to Times Square? I mean, we've been in New York for New Year's, actually. We were just in Washington Heights. But I don't know that I'd go to Times Square and stand there.
Okay, well, New Year's in general would be cool. I don't think I'd go to Times Square, but just know that
there are
times, or if there's a big music festival in a certain area,
right.
Or if maybe a really important baseball or basketball game or something that's happening, stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and then specific areas are going to be packed. And so if you're going to do something super touristy like Times Square, which we are not judging you for because everyone should see it once. It's very cool.
Oh, I'd see it more than once. Times Square is cool.
We've seen it a
lot. You
lot.
just don't really want to go eat there.
Yeah. Yeah. But if that's like your thing, if you're like, I just really want to see Times Square, I really want to like go to the big M&M store and all these things, that's totally fine. Just know that if you do that in the summer, it is going to be packed. Like so packed that like they may limit people into the stores. It's so packed. So that's like a COVID leftover.
It's not a bad thing to consider like one of those hop on, hop off. If you want to do like the classic sites, and see like a quick Google search, there's so many like New York City tourism like official websites you could find.
Well, those are other things that would get us totally banned off of like some podcasts is like real travel, and we're like, you can use a hop on, hop off bus. But I will say in New York specifically, I did that the first time I went. I didn't plan this at all. I was like 17. I went with a friend of mine. Like I literally just like jumped into their trip.
Yeah.
And we used the hop on and hop off bus, and we never used any other form of transportation.
That's my point. Right.
Like we literally just like we did get off and do our thing and then get back on.
Because it's bringing, it's not only bringing you to some of the things that you might want to see if you've never been, like Empire State Building, and it probably brings you the Flatiron building.
Right. It does. Yeah. It brings you everywhere.
Yeah. So it's going to be like, you're paying for the transportation to get around Manhattan very easily.
And you get like a person talking and they'll point stuff out.
I think it's a great thing to do, especially if that's what you want to do. Like if you're someone who's like, no, I don't really care about sports. I'm not really going for a specific museum. I want to see the New York top 5. I want to do the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island thing, whatever.
Okay, but I would argue, like to my death, that seeing a Broadway show is in the top 5. Of a New York experience.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah, it's probably
you can reach out for recommendations if you're not a theater person, but like it feels like a Broadway show is a thing to see in New York, and it is.
I agree.
And if you need a recommendation for which one you should see, if you're not a theater person, you could always reach out to that because I'll talk to you for days about that.
Shelly will. So be careful if you reach out.
Actually, yeah.
I think that's a good point though, because like unless you're like really specifically into a certain museum, like there are world-class museums all over the place.
Yeah.
But Broadway is like New York as the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty. So I think that's in the top 5. Actually, what are your top 5 New York like big sites?
Oh my gosh. Well, Central Park.
Yep.
I mean, we've actually never been to the top of the Empire State Building.
I have, but that was...
Well, that's the other thing is that Bruce has lived in Connecticut for a long time. So often he'll be like, we took a field trip there. And I can't even fathom that because I lived in, Tennessee. But for me, the top sites, or top things of New York City, to me, Broadway is like the number one, but that's also, my own personal preference. I think, can we like put together buildings like
what?
Sightseeing buildings together
as one of the 5?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. No.
Well, because you don't necessarily have to go in them.
No,
but
that's
like
true.
To see, like for example, to see the Statue of Liberty is very cool. Do I need to actually take the ferry to Ellis Island? No. Some people would want to, which is awesome. But like, I think seeing it in some capacity is part of the New York experience.
Okay, so if you're gonna lump them all together, that's like a 5 within a 5. Because you've got Statue of Liberty, the Flatiron Building, the Empire State Building, now the World Trade Center
Memorial.
And the museum and the memorial is up there.
Well, that's kind of my point. Is like all those things. Like I don't necessarily like.
Okay, so just seeing the landmark, like the Brooklyn Bridge.
I've never even seen the Brooklyn Bridge.
I know. I don't think I have either.
We never make it down to Brooklyn.
I know. That's something that's on our list.
Yeah.
But anyway,
it's so far from everything else. Like we said, if we're going to Manhattan, we're doing one of two things. We're either going to see a show, so we're staying kind of central Times Square area, or we're going to see our friend in Queens. Those are like our two things
hubs.
we're doing in New York, and so Brooklyn's just like not part of that. But
So
I did stay in Brooklyn once with a friend.
That's true. That was the one time that I think I went. Yeah. But okay, so like the monuments or like the main like monumental things, a Broadway show. So 3 others.
No, I said Central Park.
It was a separate thing. So Central Park in and of itself. Yeah, I agree.
Central Park I've never seen something, and like the closest I've seen to a Central Park thing is like Hyde Park. That's
in
what it's called,
London,
right? In
the
London?
difference in London though is that it's so spread out compared to like New York is what, like 15, Manhattan specifically
It's
is
like 15 miles, I think.
yeah, and how many miles across? Like
Not
3,
many.
2.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's, you know what I mean? It's like you can almost see it across.
Yeah, it's like
So
super compact and then
that's
random like park in the middle.
Yes, that's.
But everyone uses the park. I think that's the other thing. It's not just like an empty lot of land that like only tourists go through. Like
Oh, no,
people are playing
It's
like
huge.
full sports leagues in there. Like local people all use Central Park. Like, you know what I mean? It's very popular for everybody. So that's got to be in the top. So that's 3.
There's got to be something with food, but New York is a
I
mecca
was
for
gonna
like
say,
anything you
the
want to
food is
find,
a
you
thing.
can find it.
I mean, pizza.
Okay, yeah, okay, pizza, that's good.
New York pizza. Could we do pizza and bagels? See, I can't just do 5.
Pizza and bagels.
Yeah, because I feel like those are you gotta have a breakfast and a lunch.
Yes.
There. Oh man, and then
See, I guess would you say a museum? There's so many world class.
there's so many.
So you've got like some
For
important.
me, like I love the Natural History Museum, and
yeah, me too.
like that we've been to that a few times. And if we were gonna take someone, that would definitely be part of the day.
I'd probably pick that over the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Yeah,
That's hard though.
for me, it's not that hard, but that's just because I'm like
the
not.
science one is cool.
I'm a science teacher. Like, yeah, clearly I like science, and I just think it's very cool. And like they're rotating.
All right, so we've got
cool.
like 4. I feel like the 5th has to be do something very obscure because that's the other thing we're missing. You know,
That's true.
I feel like if there's something you like in this world, or there's like a culture that you are from or represent, I almost will put money down right now that you're going to find it somehow represented somewhere in New York City.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that, like to find something that you can't do anywhere else.
Like obscure and just total. Like there was, what was it? We were looking for. I don't even know if this is obscure enough as my example, but I just
have
remember,
a really good one.
Well, it's going to beat mine, but I just want to share when we were looking for places that were like non-alcoholic drinks.
Yeah.
Which is definitely more popular now because, you know, Shelly's pregnant. And I found this bar.
It's popular now because I'm pregnant.
Because of Shelly. Yep, she made it popular. No, but it was a bar that was, I think before it kind of became cool, maybe, it was specifically non-alcoholic bar. Like the whole bar was like NA. And it was definitely like either Dungeon and Dragon board gamey type theme. Do you remember?
No,
but it was very
but
like
I feel like
where else would that survive? Is my point. It's like it's a bar that has no alcohol. Okay, that's the irony.
Yeah, right.
It was thriving.
Well, there was another one that was I kind of wish we had been able to do, but it just didn't work in our schedule, and it was a theater thing. So clearly we're theater people, and it was something Manor. Do you remember? I was like literally gonna buy a ticket.
Oh no, we're not doing. Is it the scary thing?
I don't even know if it was like actually scary.
Oh, no, never mind. Okay, I was thinking of something else. Is this like the?
It was in Chelsea.
It's a live production that you kind of are a part of in a way, but you walk through. Is it like?
Yes, it is. I honestly.
It's a play.
It doesn't even tell you what it really like. You just have to go. I think
it's like you're walking through the play in a way.
Yeah, but like you're not
what's that
really
called?
part of it. It's called like Westerly Manor or something like that. It's in Chelsea, but they have different. All right,
we're gonna find
events.
it and put it in the show notes.
But my point of the story is like that is a weird thing that like it just was so bizarre that like they couldn't even explain it like what it was gonna be, and you just kind of had to like trust that it was cool.
Right. And
it had lots of really high reviews, so like whatever it was, like it was clearly cool. It had like a speakeasy attached to it. It was very 1920s. But anyways, my point of that story is like, even for theater people, that obviously you think Broadway is the thing that it has for you. It's like, no, there's even more obscure. Like you can keep going down rabbit holes in New York. You can find a lot of stuff. So yeah, I like that. That's your 5th thing. It's like find something.
Yeah, find
like
something
doesn't exist anywhere else yet.
Yet.
That's the other thing is a lot of things start in New York and then all of a sudden they get somewhere else.
Right. Either start and don't exist because it's so niche, or is just like, I think at least in the United States would be very hard to find it represented like a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Like a restaurant or a food that you'd have to travel very far
right
outside of the country to find, but then you find like the authentic version is right there in someone's like hole in the wall kitchen or shop or something like that.
Right. That's similar to London, where we went to that Ugandan restaurant.
Yes. Yeah. London would be up there for sure. Because, it was a Ugandan restaurant where they did Rolexes. Yeah. Those, like, chapati roll. Yep. Yes.
Anyways, so New York is amazing, and we recommend it to literally everybody because there's something for literally everybody, but we would not suggest just dropping yourself in New York and trying to find these things because like a trip to London or like Disney World, they're so overwhelming because there's so much to do that you don't want to get stuck in not doing anything.
Well, especially if you only have a weekend.
Right, because you can't make up your mind. You don't know where to go. It's big, it's loud. It's really spread out, but also very dense.
Yep.
It's an interesting place, but we definitely recommend it. And if you do want any suggestions because you found a really cheap flight, you can always reach out to us, especially if you're a theater person or would like to do a Broadway show.
Let us know. Yeah. Join the Facebook group, send us an email, whatever works. But yeah, thanks for listening.
Yeah. See you next time.
See ya.
Did you know that every time you book a Disney or Universal vacation, you're paying for a service that you may not even be using?
Really?
That's right. Travel agent costs are added to your Disney or Universal vacation, whether you use one or not.
So you're telling me that I'm paying for something even though I'm not getting the help?
You got it. So next time you want to book a theme park vacation, make your money work for you. By booking with Magic Pass Travel, you'll get our expertise and years of experience without paying any extra and while supporting a small business.
Check out our show notes to find our contact information.
Can't wait to help you plan your next adventure.